is I think Eric Byres is a classic example of a SCADA apologist.
I think as experts, what we need to do is base our recommendations on reality, and this is where I think Dale and I disagree. What is reality?
You know, when you and I met, you probably don't remember this, but I think it was 2002 at ISA Expo.
Oh yeah, I remember.
And you were giving a demonstration on how from your laptop PC you could make, I think it was a Modicon quantum lights go on and off.
Yeah.
2002.
Yes.
You know, and it made it to Black Hat in 2012. And I don't want to be here in 2022 saying, you know, it's going to be there in decades. This is very exciting. Hi, I'm Dale Peterson, and welcome to the Unsolicited Response Show. This is a throwback episode going back to S4X14, recorded in January 2014, back when we were at the old Coven Center before we moved down to the big theater in Miami South Beach. So it's a kind of a fun way to see the venue and see some of the people in the audience during the Q&A. I think you'll enjoy that as well. But Eric and I were debating whether he was a SCADA apologist or a SCADA realist. I was calling him a SCADA apologist, along with a lot of leaders in the industry, because they were not saying that we needed to fix level 1, the PLCs and the protocols that communicate to and from the PLCs, that we needed to get past this insecure by design as a priority. Whereas Eric and many others were saying, yes, we should do that, but it's going to take us decades to do, and we should be doing other things first. So I'm not going to rehash the whole debate here in the intro, but I think you'll find it very interesting and still somewhat applicable. A lot of the points are exactly the same today, which is a little bit sad considering it's almost 8 years later. The other thing that I wanted to point out, and this is the good news, is that in that interim time between January 2014 and now, we actually have some securable PLCs. So for example, in the last months, there's been announcements of vulnerabilities in the Rockwell Automation Logix PLC line, that there was and still is a hard-coded password in each one of those products deployed. And guess what? There's no way of getting around that except if you move to SIP Secure. SIP Secure is not only the protocol that adds security, but it also has signed firmware, secure boot, and that. So there's actually now secure solutions. There's some from Schneider Electric. Increasingly, they're being pushed out across all protocols and all vendors. Still very new, but if you are deploying a new system, you have options if security matters to you. If you want to upgrade your systems, there are now options available. And this ties into a point that I make in this debate, and that is the key is management awareness. If management is looking at the leaders in this industry and maybe looking at you as a leader in your company as to what I should be doing next, if we are not saying, look, whatever we do is going to be limited by the fact that all the communication, all the control communication, all the administration communication is currently going to a device that's insecure by design, that will do whatever the attacker tells it to do. If we don't raise that up to management, if we don't say we need to have a plan to deal with this, it won't be dealt with. And that's a problem that we've seen going all the way back to 2002. So hopefully some of you and the leaders in this industry will start raising this as a priority item. Obviously, my time frame was not met. We didn't get this done in 2018, but at least we started to see some solutions where now the ball is in the asset owner's court. The asset owner now can decide whether they want to implement security at level 1 in their PLCs and in their controllers, and whether they should expedite their upgrades, maybe shorten their life cycle to get there. Now, to be honest with you, as unfortunate as it is, I don't expect this to happen very often. I have some minor hope on the greenfield, on the new installations, but accelerating upgrades I don't think is going to happen until we get another major technical change, and that is virtualization at level 1. I think that is finally what's going going to be the factor that's going to drive us to actually secure level 1, is we get everything but the I/O virtualized. This makes upgrades easier, this makes maintenance easier, this makes recovery easier. All the benefits that we're seeing at virtualization at level 2, which again was said, we can't do that for years, and now it's the way most of the vendors are recommending their systems be deployed. So that's happening at vendor 2. We'll get those same benefits at level 1. So we need to get there, and I think that's what's finally going to push us over the hump. But anyway, I hope after this intro, I hope you watched this. I think it was a lot of fun. Eric and I do go at each other. We're good friends and have dinner afterwards, but we had very different points of view on this. Mine hasn't changed too much. I don't know if his has. I didn't ask him back for a round 2. But the other thing, as I mentioned at the beginning, one of the things you'll really enjoy is as you get about halfway through, we open it up to questions, and you see a lot of the, quite frankly, the pioneers, the legends in this industry sitting out in the crowd and asking questions. I kind of miss those smaller venues where we could have this level of interaction, and maybe we'll find some way to bring that back for the next S4 in a limited way. But enjoy the episode.
Eric have been having an online argument, blog post against blog post, for several months now. A discussion on whether Eric is a SCADA Apologist or a SCADA Realist. And now they're going to debate one another in a format in front of everyone. They're going to start out with 5-minute arguments, each explaining their position, then 5-minute rebuttals for each person, and then 3 minutes for questions on each side. And then I believe Eric's going to have a closing statement as well. And so I'm kind of the ringmaster on here. I was not slipped any money by either one, except officially through the paycheck. So please take it away.
Yeah, that's my trapdoor.
And Dale is first.
And we agreed to go first. We were going to do a coin flip, but we thought this made more sense. So I really appreciate Eric doing this, and it was actually his suggestion, so he's a very brave man. And this argument or discussion started back at S4 2013, a year ago, where I was pushing the issue that we actually need to start securing or demanding that critical infrastructure ICS be secured now. You know, it shouldn't be something that we wait decades to do. And the biggest impediment to making this progress is what I call the SCADA Apologist. And a SCADA Apologist is somebody who really understands and explains the problem well. They say these control systems, especially the field devices and protocols, have no security, they're fragile, they fall over easily, they can be compromised easily. And they say, guess what? They run the critical infrastructure. So if they are hacked or go down, there's huge economic damage to a community or area, maybe environmental damage, people die. So they explain the vulnerability, the impact, and you would expect the next sentence would be, and we need to fix this now. We need to upgrade or replace these systems now if they're running the critical infrastructure. But what a SCADA apologist does is he says, but these systems have life cycles in decades, but they're really expensive, but we're not going to really fix this problem for decades. And my contention is that the SCADA apologist is the biggest reason we're not making progress, because if you tell people that are running businesses a problem won't be fixed for decades, they're not going to worry about it for about 8 years. So we're just giving them this built-in excuse to say, oh, I really don't have to worry about it now because it's not a near-term problem. There's a lot of different types of SCADA apologists. One of the biggest SCADA apologists are, I believe, is DHS, INL, and their equivalents around the world. I mean, when do you actually hear the government organizations that asset owners and vendors would listen to most actually say, you need to upgrade or replace your critical infrastructure ICS to something that is not insecure by design or fragile? You just never hear that. You hear, put up perimeters and do all these compensating controls, but you never actually say, we need it to be secure. I could go into ISA Secure, ISA 99, there's a lot. But the other category, and the reason we're here, is I think Eric Byres is a classic example of a SCADA apologist. Eric is a very well-respected, and for good reason, man in this industry. He did great research at BCIT, developed a great product in Tofino, and has helped numerous owner-operators secure their stuff. So people respect him. They say, when Eric says something, it means something because he really understands what he's talking about. So when Eric follows up his statements by saying it will take decades for this problem to be solved, he's actually one of the reasons we're not making progress. So my plea to Eric and to others of you who are making this statement is, get on the bus that we actually need to fix this problem now, rather than saying it's something that is unlikely to occur for decades.
Thanks, Dale. Oops.
Might just take a second.
Thanks, Dale. Yep. And go. All right. Can you hear me? Ah, yes. Okay, so you heard Dale talk about replacing or upgrading the entire system, all these controllers, and is that really a solution? And because to me, really, this question isn't about whether I'm a SCADA apologist or not. What is this debate really about? I mean, does any of us believe we should sit here and do nothing? No, we wouldn't be in this room. I wouldn't be in this room if I thought nothing was an answer. It's not. We got to fix this now. And do we need to wait for 10 years? Can we just sit around? Can we just tell the companies, oh, yeah, don't worry for 10 years? No. I mean, that's not a way that my boss is going to let me keep my job if I say, oh, don't buy our product today, wait 10 years. They're not going to buy that. My boss is not going to buy that. So, no, the answer is that we got to do something now. And we have to do something big now. But really this debate about is, what is the right thing to do? What's the most efficient thing? So Dale talked about replacing all those controllers or upgrading all those controllers that are out there. So I did a little research, and I called ARC, and they told me that there are, by their estimate, somewhere around $500 billion worth of controllers out in the world right now. And let's say we replace them in the next 3 years, because that's a long time, but let's say that's $166 billion worth of controllers that need to be replaced. But if any of you have replaced a controller, you know you don't just pull out one model and put in a new model. There's re-engineering, there's all commissioning, all those things, and it could cost you 10 times as much, or 100 times, or even 1,000 times as much. I had a story in my blog about a company that could replace the controllers on their compressors for about a cost of about $8,000, but it was $250,000 worth of re-engineering per compressor. So let's just take the most conservative estimate, a 10 to 1. Now we're talking just shy of $2 trillion a year. Is that realistic? I don't think so, because the total spend on process control in 2012, according to Control Global, worldwide, that's valves, not just controllers, valves, everything, that was $102 billion, just a fraction, not even enough to cover all the controllers, never mind all the engineering costs. Or what's the estimates for the total spend that people estimate people are going to use for control system security? Well, the most outrageous, there it is, one that I found was from a company called Markets and Markets, saying $9 billion a year will be spent. Or you look at a large company like, let's say, Royal Dutch Shell. Their entire maintenance CapEx for next year, according to their annual report, is $2 billion. There's no way, this is a reality check. We don't have this kind of money to rip and replace the entire infrastructure. And so the only way it's going to happen is if a tooth fairy comes along and you can put your controllers under your pillows. And I don't believe in the tooth fairy. These organizations we deal with are not agile. They're slow moving. We need to give them answers that they can make quick decisions on, and rip and replace is not one of them. And costs matter and downtime matter. And money is tight. We've just come through a recession. Some parts of the world are still in a recession. And security isn't the only problem facing the boardroom. And in fact, we've been here before. As any of you who remember the disaster of Bhopal, that was a major crisis that required a rework of control systems. We've been through a major environmental crisis like Deepwater Horizon. We've been through major and regulatory events like OSHA and EPA. We've been through some major availability events like Y2K. How many of you guys were around for Y2K and remember what what a gong show that was. And you know what? It still takes 20 years to replace a controller after all of those things. Maybe we can do it in 10 years if we really push. But Dale's solution is a 10% solution, and it's not good enough. We're not going to, so we need some other ideas. We need a real-world solution that solves all the pieces of the puzzle. 10%, let's rip and replace 10% of the equipment every year. Let's try and do it. I think it's optimistic, but let's try it. But there's other pieces to this puzzle. We need better real-time monitoring what's actually going on. Most people don't even know how many PLCs they've got on their network, or as Prime Controls likes to call it, how many lost cows they have on their network. Secure protocols. Sure, take the controller out. You still got to deal with the protocols that are insecure. Or user awareness. How many users are not even aware of this organization or this event happening? They don't even know they got a problem. Or compensating controls. Yes, you've got a vulnerable controller. Rip and replace is not the only solution. There's lots of ways. One of them is a way I promote personally, but there's lots of ways to deal with this problem. And quite frankly, I think the architectures themselves are largely broken. I see too many big flat networks with no segregation whatsoever. Never mind a broken controller. How about at least divide up the network? And lastly, how do we get to management? We still don't know how to talk to management to ask for even $1 million, never mind $1 trillion. So really, my message to you and my message to Dale is, yeah, let's replace some equipment, but it's going to be a little piece of the solution. The big picture is going to take a whole bunch of efforts, and we need to work on them now, and we need to decide which of those pieces need to be the priority.
All right. Dale, your rebuttal?
Boy, all my notes go right out the window when I see that tooth fairy picture. Now we go out for blood. So I think, you know, the last block he put up there, management awareness, is actually what I'm talking about with SCADA Apologist. I think one of the reasons we're not getting management awareness is because we're not actually telling them the truth. But I think there were two parts to what Eric talked about that were very, I guess, I don't want to say intentionally confusing, but they blur the issue. When you're looking at the total, you know, you're looking at this total population of all the controllers out there, we're really talking about critical infrastructure. You know, so that's a small fraction of the total controllers. It's not, now maybe if you're an owner of a cookie factory, maybe you want to consider this, but the greater societal or country or region really isn't as concerned about that cookie factory as they are about the power, the water, the pipeline, things like that. The other thing, and this is the one that bothers me most, is this rip and replace term. I mean, I think that's very disingenuous but very effective. So it's an amazing debating technique. If we take the most, probably the most famous example, Stuxnet. Stuxnet would, to fix Stuxnet, to add, let's say, source and data authentication to an S7 PLC from Siemens, would not require rip and replace. It would require a firmware upgrade. That's quite a bit different than rip and replace. So in most of these situations, now if you talk about the old GED20 that was running, you know, 30-year-old technology, that's rip and replace, but most of them are running modern platforms and they can handle this. So it's firmware upgrade, software upgrade, maybe Ethernet card upgrade, but it's not this huge rip and replace. The other point I guess I'd like to make is, even if you accept the upgrade argument that Eric gives, you know, that it's just too expensive to upgrade these things and we can't do it, shouldn't we at least be saying that every new critical infrastructure ICS be deployed with basic security and not be insecure by design? I mean, I would think that we shouldn't be putting anything new in that we're going to need to upgrade in the future that don't have these issues. And that should be something that we should be hearing from the experts, from DHS, from INL, and just stressing to all for that management awareness that this needs to stop now. We can't make this problem even worse and extend it more. The other area that I thought was very confusing is you show that chart with the puzzle and all those pieces. And they're certainly valid, those arguments. But really we're talking about the core problem is these systems are insecure by design. You can add all these compensating controls to try to make it better, But until you solve the core problem, you're just really working around, and you're just going to never be able to secure it the way you want. If you put a Tofino in front of the controller and you have to allow write or reprogram commands through the Tofino's going to pass them through. So if you can live in a read-only environment, some of these compensating controls work, but overall they won't. I guess the last thing I'd say is I'm a recovering SCADA apologist. I think almost everyone in this industry has been a SCADA apologist, and I was a full-fledged one until 2008. And 10 years after 9/11, I went cold turkey, and we said this would take decades back in 2001. A decade passed and we made no progress. So it's time to actually stop being SCADA apologists and make our statement and draw our line in the sand.
Thanks, Dale. So let's make one thing really clear. I really agree with Dale on one point. The vendors need to make secure control systems. If we'd see those come out tomorrow, I'd be the first person to stand on the bandwagon and say, go. That's fantastic. But I don't see them out there yet, and we need them. We need them badly. We need better control systems. But really, I'm speaking towards for the end users. What are they going to do? Because they're stuck. I mean, there isn't a secure control system out there for them to install. And they, as Dale says, those systems are insecure by design. So while we wait for the vendors, sure, we can tear out everything and put in another insecure control system. And we still have a system that's insecure design, and it's not even the vendor's fault because the protocols are broken. I mean, no matter what you do, you're still going to have Modbus or Ethernet IP or Profinet or, well, actually, DNP3 is making a real good move. Let's hear it for Andrew here and his team for actually creating a secure protocol. But for 99.9% of the time, right now, the users are stuck. And so we need to help them, and that's where I think Dale and I differ. I think you and I could work great on talking to the vendors, and you've read my blogs about how I beat up a certain vendor from Europe repeatedly on some of their design decisions. But for the end user, we need to help the end user get out of that getting stuck between a rock and a hard place. And massive upgrades or massive even firmware upgrades, and I disagree with Dale here quite vehemently that most of the equipment out there is new. It's not. There's still a lot of PLC 5s shipping today. There's still a lot of old Quantums shipping today. There is a lot of old gear out there. I go into factory after factory and I see equipment from the 60s. And so, well, actually, I'll give you an example. I designed the lighting control system for a large football stadium in North America back in 1989, and I used the best equipment I could get my paws on at the time. It was a GE product called an Econ and a processor called a 386 and an operating system called DOS DeskView. Now, you know what runs that lighting system, and by the way, it's a safety critical system because if the lights go out, either you lose revenue during the Super Bowl or people get trampled. Either one is pretty serious. Guess what? They're still running DOS DeskView. Why? Could they afford maybe something newer like a Pentium? Sure. The reason is the re-engineering costs. Making a change, whether it's a firmware upgrade or a rip and replace or whatever you want to call it, costs a lot of money. And so Dale's suggesting that, well, imagine we got a chicken coop here, Dale. I think, you know, we talked a lot about chickens and chicken salsa and chicken stuff. So let's go back to that chicken analogy. And let's imagine we're trying to build a chicken coop and keep the foxes out. And yeah, the chicken coop is got a lot of problems with it. But tearing down the whole coop and rebuilding a new one isn't very efficient. I mean, what do we do with the chickens meanwhile? There's lots and lots of alternatives that we can use. And that's what I think we really need to look at as a group is what are our alternatives while we wait for the vendors to come out with truly secure systems like Dale suggested. And while we wait for those systems to get deployed slowly into the companies, it's not my choice to go in slowly. I'd like them to go in tomorrow. But the reality is they're going to go in slowly, and we, as a group, need to figure out how we're going to secure the system while we're waiting, how we can push that forward, but come up with compensating controls. So, again, I don't think we're disagreeing all that much. It's just how we get there. Both of us agree that something has to be done. both of us agree something has to be done now, but what advice can we give to the poor guy in the trenches, the guy that's running a refinery, a guy who's running a compressor, a guy who's responsible for securing a critical substation? What advice are we going to give to him to say, I know I've got an insecure system, what do I do now? And that's where I think the real-world solution is needed.
So I think you actually get
Oh, and are you going to ask me a question too? Oh,
Yes,
okay.
Eric gets to start out with the questions. We have, what, 3 minutes and 2 questions, or 1 question? One each.
One
All
each.
right.
Okay, good. Okay, I guess my real question is, so what would you, so say somebody does want to just replace their controllers. I have a large, a very large end user right now that has a lot, I won't mention the vendor's name, but they have a lot of product that uses Ethernet IP. And say they want to replace their entire control system and upgrade it tomorrow. Now, there's about to be a talk, I think, this afternoon about some major problems with Ethernet IP and some flaws in it. What would you suggest to them? What would they buy? I mean, what would they buy that they didn't have to rip and replace next week?
Well, you've talked about the examples you had where you saw systems put in and they were still there 20 or 30 years later. I would suggest they not replace the system until they can buy something that is secure and make that known to the vendors. You mentioned, well, it would be great if the vendors do this. If you talk to the vendors, they say, we'll do whatever the customers want. So, they need people like you and I and a lot of the others in this room to insist on security. And maybe that means they can't replace their control system for a couple more years. And maybe they have this gigantic tender out there that the vendors can say, oh, I need to add this functionality to get this. When I listened to you explain in your last talk about all the issues with this, I just heard all these reasons why my system is never going to be secure. And that, that kind of argument will result in what's happened for the last 10 years. When you and I met, you probably don't remember this, but I think it was 2002 at ISA Expo.
Oh, yeah, I remember.
And you were giving a demonstration on how, from your laptop PC, you could make, I think it was a Modicon Quantum,
Yeah, it
lights
was.
go on and off.
Yeah.
2002.
Yes.
And it made it to Black Hat in 2012. And I don't want to be here in 2022 saying, it's going to be there in decades. So I really think, some of these systems may not be ready to be upgraded, and we need to start saying, this is the big system I'm going to replace, and this is what you need to do, and vendors, when you can offer me this, then I'm going to buy it. I guess I get to ask you a question.
Yeah, you get to ask me one. Okay, fire away.
So, I want to go back to the rip and replace.
Yeah.
Because, as I said, it's a very effective term. So, would you consider a firmware upgrade or an Ethernet upgrade? So, and I'll admit, if you get an old enough controller, it is an upgrade. But if you look at a lot of the models that have been sold in the last 5 or 10 years that the critical infrastructure is buying, a lot of those have quite a bit of capability and horsepower in them. So is a firmware upgrade or an Ethernet upgrade, is that rip and replace?
Well, no, I mean, I don't think a firmware upgrade would be rip and replace. But that doesn't mean that firmware upgrades are cheap or easy. You can't just, just upgrading them doesn't mean that that's it. Upgrade them and call it an afternoon, because you do have all your re-engineering, recertification, recommissioning costs. Because if that change is going to be significant enough, well, let's just take it and now ask for authentication. Okay, great. That's a good improvement. I'm all for it. But now all of a sudden, all your HMIs that are talking to that controller also had better ask for or had better authenticate themselves. Okay, that means we are going to have to coordinate upgrading all the HMI firmware or software, and we're going to have to do this in one shot, and we're going to have to certify that that actually works, because if it doesn't, you're going to have a real mess. So it's not a simple matter of just simply doing an upgrade. It's an upgrade plus recommissioning, and I think that's where the real challenge is. A lot of these systems, these critical systems, get shutdowns once every 2 years. And so where I see the real problem here isn't whether we should upgrade. Yeah, if there's a better firmware upgrade, go for it. Do it as soon as you can. But what is it we do in the meantime? What advice, some of the things are really simple. For God's sakes, break up these big flat networks. Again, that is not an expensive task, and yet I see massive flat networks that run right across control systems. And if you've got a problem in one corner, you've got it in the other corner real fast. And those, I think those are lower hanging fruit and easier things that will make a bigger impact. But it all needs to be weighed. If you can do an easy upgrade, you should do it. If you can't, then you better find something else to do, because doing nothing is not good enough.
All right, well, thank you both. We're actually going to open it up.
I got
to
a closing here. Oh, questions, right.
Yes, we get to open up the floor now for questions. So we've got Natalia on this side, and I'm on this side. Go ahead. Ralph had his hand up first.
Ralph Langner from the Langner Group. Well, I'm sorry, but it's more like a comment. I just wanted to point out that Eric's argument that, no, it's just impossible to introduce new technology within a couple of years. That's just not valid, because we have seen it in that last decade. Think about Profinet. Well, actually, if you look back in those 10 years, Profinet was not only defined, it is also introduced and commissioned at a large scale in Germany. Guess what? There is no security in Profinet. Nobody cares. But this is an example where the asset owner base actually and the vendors demonstrated, well, we can introduce new technology into the marketplace within a couple of years. It works.
You know, I don't disagree that you can introduce new technology, but it's taken a good decade to actually get it widely deployed. I mean, the first time I saw Profinet was probably over 10 years ago. It takes time to get it rolled out, and that's really where I'm in a wide scale. So, but there's no question, I think the vendors could start to introduce new technology in very short order, and I think that would be really important.
Corey Thune, South Fork Security. This kind of piggybacks on that point in that I wonder if you could do a quick back and forth. Sorry, I'll stand up. There. Hi. If you could do a quick back and forth on whether you think the industry is capable of a revolution to say, like, could a startup ICS vendor succeed in this industry?
You want to take that first? Or?
I don't think that a startup could do it. You know, and that's why I think it's so important for, you know, Eric and Jonathan and Ralph and Jason and all these people out there to push it in INL and DHS. I think it requires the people that are respected and people look at for what they should be doing to all together be singing that you need to upgrade or replace your systems. But I think, you know, if you just even if you had the best technology as a startup, I don't think you'd stand a chance.
I don't think there's a chance. Zero. In fact, even a large company, I mean, Kaspersky wants to write a new operating system for control systems. I'm sorry, Eugene, it's not going to fly. This industry moves slowly. There are very clear partnerships. You know, you go to Exxon and you'll find Honeywell. You go to Chevron, you'll find Yokogawa and Allen Bradley. You go to Germany, you find Siemens. It's not going to change. There is zero chance that you will replace the control systems. What a startup company can do, Tofino's an example, is add value to the existing vendors. You know, that's why we build little firewalls that get rebranded as Honeywell firewalls, we can help move the needle. Little startups can do that, but they can't replace the majors. The majors are there.
Mike Amati with Codamicon. I think Eric touched on the problem when he said that one of the big problems, and I've seen this, is we've tested controllers from companies. We find some that just topple over immediately and others that don't. But the old controllers still sell in the thousands and maybe even in the millions. And they're going to continue to sell that way. And some large customers say, hey, this is our controller. and this is what we've standardized on, and we're going to continue to buy this, and the company really has to do that. So in that case, a compensating control like a Tofino is the only solution that I can see. I would like to see the plan being not rip and replace, but going forward, okay, when you implement controllers, that you implement ones that are more secure. But I still believe you're always going to need the compensating controls, because 10 years down the line, the controller still works, and there's new vulnerabilities, and you can no longer upgrade the firmware. I know Apple gets away with being able to force us to buy a new laptop every year so we can use the latest version of iTunes, but I'm not sure we can do that in the control environment yet. Well, I guess my question, to Dale is, do you not see, or do you not believe that the compensating control is going to really be the only solution going forward, really forever? I mean, it has to be part of the solution.
I hope not. I mean, I hear a lot of people say nothing's going to change until something really bad happens. I can't say they're wrong, but I don't want to live in a world like that, whereas, as professionals, we say we're just going to wait for a real bad disaster to happen, and then we're going to add authentication, source and data authentication to these systems. Tofino, I've seen Tofino, that particular model, let alone that type of technology, deployed very effectively between control and safety networks to get read-only data. But if you need to do things to that controller, if you need to send writes or have other commands sent to the controller, the Tofino can't tell whether it's an authentic command or an inauthentic command. So you really have to solve the core problems. You can reduce risk with these compensating controls, and I'm not saying a lot of the suggestions Eric has are not valid for an individual owner-operator, but as leaders in the community, I think we have to be pushing for the real solution.
Eric, did you have anything else to add?
Actually, I'll add something to Dale's comment, and I appreciate the plug for Tofino. And there is, so you want to write to a controller, but the Tofino can nail it down so only a single machine can write to that controller. In other words, we're whitelisting that, and we're reducing the attack surface. I mean, that's true even for authentication. Authentication is great as long as somebody doesn't own the authenticated box. So we're always going to have a risk when you write to a controller. I think, believe me, I'm all in favor of authentication. Great. And I actually disagree a little bit with Mike in that we're always going to need compensating controls. I think we're going to need compensating controls for the next 20 years. And then hopefully, all the old stuff, all the vendors have good authentication, really, really robust systems, and everybody's installed them. But I think we're going to need better architectures, better training, better compensating controls, a whole bunch of betters to get us through the next 20 years. Well, this is true. Yeah.
All right.
I'll be retired then, so I won't worry about it.
We have time now for maybe one more question. We have 5 minutes left for this debate, and I believe it's Aaron.
Aaron Leverett, IOActive. One simple question for you, but with a little context. So this year, or sorry, last year, I had the opportunity to go to GridSec, and the keynote speaker was Thad Allen, who was the chief incident responder for the president for a while, did Deepwater Horizon and also Katrina. And he said one of the biggest problems with incident responders is that they fall in love with the problem. And they walk around and complain and say, this is really difficult. It's an act of God. It's a crisis that we can't handle. It's sort of this sort of thing. So my question to both of you is quite simple. Do you think that we're in love with the problem?
All right, since Dale took the first one, this is going to be Eric on this one.
Okay. I think that's a risk, but I don't think so because everybody here really wants to find a solution. I've certainly seen that happen, but ultimately I truly believe Dale, myself, and all of you here want to solve this. You want to come up with a way to put yourself out of business. I mean, I would be very happy if nobody needed another Tofino, everything was secure. That actually would really let me sleep better at night. So I don't think we're at that point yet.
I don't think we're in love with the problem, but I do think there's an unholy marriage between vendors and owner-operators. The vendors Well, the owner-operators don't want to spend the money and take the time and do what it would take to actually, whether it's rip and replace or do firmware upgrade or replace an Ethernet card or even something simpler than that. That's a huge effort, and it's not something that they've done for decades, and so you're saying take all this new cost and effort and do it. So they don't want to do it. So they want the vendors to tell them they really can't do it or they don't need to do it. So the vendors are incentivized to keep their customers happy. They know the answer the customers want to hear. The customers don't want to hear you have to upgrade all this stuff. The customers want to hear, no, everything's fine. And you see a lot of actually these insecure by design issues are addressed exclusively by marketing departments. Not by changes in product, but just very effective marketing products, you know, with holistic security and other things like that. So I think it's a problem that a lot of people really don't want to face up to. I don't think they love it, but it's just more convenient if everyone agrees it's impossible to solve.
All right, thank you both. Eric, I believe you had a closing that you wish to deliver?
I do. You know, fundamentally, I think Dale and I really agree. We got to fix the problem. It's critical if we're going to keep our factories running, our lights on, we're going to keep our nation safe, our way of life. I mean, I think this really matters. I think as experts, what we need to do is base our recommendations on reality, and this is where I think Dale and I disagree. What is reality? And we need to focus on what is going to give us answers today. What can companies start to do today to make their systems more secure? Yes, it is going to be great when there's authenticated protocols, when there's authenticated Modbus, when there's authenticated Ethernet IP. But right now, I think companies have a problem that they need to address now. And I think that's one of the big challenges we need to face while we push for these new protocols, new systems. And we need to empower the people in the trenches, the engineers, the control techs, the security professionals, even the managers who have to go fight to the board for money. Because those are hardworking people. They're in the trenches trying to keep the lights on. So rather than battling, Dale, I propose that you and I team up this year, and we sit down and we come up with a list of what has to happen. It may include some replacement. It may even include a few firmware upgrades. But what is it that the people out in the trenches need to do now in order to get a secure control system? And we maybe write an open letter or a manifesto, and we spell out what we think this industry needs to do. And maybe it's also what the vendors need to do. But you and I sit down and bury the sword and see if we can come up with an answer for the industry. And to help Dale get down in the trenches and get down and dirty, the team at Tofino brought him a little gift. And so, Dale, I'd like to offer you this to help you. No, it's not the dress. And it'll help you get down in the trenches and really be able to understand what those poor guys. Is it FR? No, it isn't FR, sorry. And here's one more little. So we'd love to see you in the trenches with us, trying to help the people who really are trying to keep the lights on. Thanks, Dale. It's been a pleasure.